Two officers believed they could embarrass a homeless black veteran in a quiet diner without consequences. However, they had no idea who she was or whom she might contact. That error ended up costing them everything. Rain possessed a way of silencing all noise except for the mind's relentless chatter. It trickled down the back of Sergeant Nina Reynolds's neck as she opened the glass door of the small diner. This was the type of place with a flickering open sign and the scent of burnt coffee mingling faintly with grilled bacon. Her boots made soft squelching sounds against the tile floor, leaving irregular wet footprints behind her. She did not raise her gaze because she did not need to. People always stared. The diner sat just outside Fayetteville, the sort of spot you visited if your usual place was packed, or if you were simply too exhausted to care. Nina was not seeking nostalgia or comfort food. She felt cold and hungry, yes, but mostly she was weary of the weather, of walking endlessly, and of feeling invisible until it suited someone to acknowledge she was there. She slid into the corner booth by the window, allowing her pack to drop gently beside her with a soft sound. Her military jacket, faded by the sun and slightly too large around the shoulders now, clung to her frame like familiar skin. She retrieved a crumpled $5 bill and smoothed it carefully on the table. All she wanted was a cup of coffee. The waitress, probably in her mid-20s, hesitated. A name tag read Emily, and her eyes shifted from Nina's face to her boots, and finally to the duffel bag on the floor. "Are you planning to order something?" she inquired, more out of routine than genuine curiosity. Nina met her gaze with "Coffee cream if you have it." Emily nodded but did not move immediately. She glanced toward the counter where the manager was standing, drying mugs with a towel that had clearly seen better days. Raising an eyebrow, he watched as Emily walked away. Nina leaned back, feeling her spine crack as it pressed against the cushion. The vinyl of the booth stuck slightly to her damp coat. Outside, through the fogged-up window, the rain continued to pour, turning the outside world into a blurred palette of grays. Then the bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of two officers. Officer Brandon Lee and Officer Cole Ramsey entered, familiar figures to the locals. Nina did not know them, but did not require a formal greeting. Certain types of men carry a presence that can be sensed from across a room. They were not soaked from the rain but appeared calm and assured. Silently scanning the diner, they exchanged quiet words before their eyes settled on her. Brandon was the first to approach, a tall man in his mid-40s, someone who seemed to lean on his belt as if it were a badge of authority. He walked deliberately, with a steady pace that some men use to size up a situation. "You, ma'am," he began. "Are you with someone?" Nina did not flinch. "No, just waiting for a cup of coffee." Behind him, Ramsey chuckled. "Are you waiting or just lingering?" Brandon gestured toward the strap of her bag. "Are you passing through or do you plan to stay a while?" Nina's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Is that a crime now?" The diner fell quieter than expected. A fork froze mid-air. Emily glanced away. No one was truly listening, yet everyone was fully aware. Brandon nudged the edge of her duffel bag with his boot. "Could you please pick that up? People might trip." She glanced down at the bag, then looked back up. "You're worried about safety now." The sarcasm was subtle, yet effective. You could sense it. Brandon Lee's jaw tensed, but he remained silent for a moment. "Cole," Ramsey crossed his arms, stepping forward. "Let's not complicate things, okay? I did not come here to create problems." Nina Reynolds said I came to sit down, perhaps enjoy something warm, then leave just that. But some might feel uneasy. Cole replied, his tone cooler now. You know how it goes. Her gaze hardened. I do. I also understand how it unfolds. When those in power start prioritizing comfort as if it outweighs basic respect. That was it. Tension had fully settled. Not loud, not chaotic, but sharp enough to sting, the type that tightens your chest without clear reason. The officers were not raising their voices. Nina was not shouting yet. Something was definitely intensifying. Then when one of them nudged her bag with attitude, things changed. It was not a forceful kick, more an assertive nudge, but Nina felt it, and so did everyone watching. Because now the atmosphere shifted. Cole shifted his weight back as if pretending it did not happen. Brandon just stood waiting like the next move was hers. Nina did not hesitate. She bent over, picked up her bag deliberately, and placed it beside her on the seat, then looked directly at both of them. Have you ever served? She asked calmly. Brandon narrowed his eyes. What does that have to do with anything? She shrugged. Nothing. This only helps me determine how much patience to offer you. Ramsey rolled his eyes. All right, this is over. You have to leave. The law requires it. I cannot sit in a public diner and just order coffee. She said you are making this more than it is. I am simply sitting here. Emily came over with a mug, her fingers wrapped firmly around the handle. She set it down softly and glanced at Brandon. She paid, she said quietly. I witnessed her, and she is not causing any disturbance. Brandon ignored her and asked Nina, Do you have somewhere else to be? I have nowhere to go, she answered. But that does not mean I do not belong here. And then suddenly something changed in Brandon's expression. His eyes tightened, the corner of his mouth twitched. Nina had seen that look before during checkpoints in foreign countries, in eyes that saw people not as individuals, but as problems. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table as if sharing a confidential thought. Let me guess. You're one of those who returns believing this country owes you something. A medal in one pocket, entitlement in the other. A few quiet gasps filled the air. A spoon fell onto a plate. Even Ramsey looked surprised. Nina did not move or blink. You want to know what I came back with? She asked calmly. A bronze star. I keep hidden in a sock and no fixed address. I never asked for handouts. I asked for peace. But peace is not easily earned when you face people like you, confusing silence with weakness. Ramsey stepped aside, muttering quietly. This is going in the wrong direction. Brandon still leaned in, smiling slightly. You are sharp. I will concede that point, but you are still walking away. She reached into her coat deliberately and slowly, enough to make Brandon Lee tense up, then pulled out an old flip phone, scratched and taped at one corner but still functioning. Lee sneered. Are you really going to call a lawyer on that burner phone? No, Nina replied calmly. Just an old acquaintance. Silence fell over the diner. Not the awkward kind, but a heavy, charged quiet, as if everyone had collectively paused to see what she would do next. She dialed Cam and said into the phone, Yes, it's me. I'm at Bailey's Diner. 2 units are here, badge numbers and all. Hold on. She then looked at Lee and Cole Ramsey and asked, Do you want to make this official, or should I guess? Lee opened his mouth but no words came out. Nina continued, Cam, I don't know what debts you owe me, but I need you to cash one in. Quickly. She ended the call. People in the diner glanced around, bewildered. Emily stepped back, unsure what she had just witnessed. The manager slipped into the kitchen, pretending not to hear. Lee finally spoke in a lower voice. "So that's supposed to scare us now?" "No," Nina said quietly. "It's a reminder that not everyone wearing a rough jacket and carrying a duffel bag is someone you can just shove out the back door." Her voice never faltered. Not when they nudged her bag, not when they tried to humiliate her, and not when she made that call. Yet something in the atmosphere had changed, as if the room suddenly realized this woman was not going to be trapped without putting up a fight. It was not the officer's words that altered the mood. The item belonged to her. Officer Brandon Lee stepped back slightly. He remained silent, but his expression spoke volumes. Cole Ramsey glanced at him, then at Nina Reynolds, and finally at the onlookers in the cafe, who no longer pretended to ignore the situation. Nina sat motionless, taking a single sip of her now lukewarm coffee. It did not matter because that phone call had shifted something profoundly, even if nobody in the room fully grasped the extent of it. Yet Cole fidgeted uneasily and asked, "So who exactly did you call?" Nina fixed her eyes ahead. "That is not for you to know," she responded. Brandon Lee was unused to such quiet resistance. He craved control, and she refused to hand it to him. "Listen, ma'am, don't play games. We've had reports about people hanging around and suspicious behavior around here." She calmly questioned, "From whom?" He cut himself off before answering. "That figures," she said. "You made a call before entering this place. You saw me and assumed I was a threat just because I have a worn coat and no makeup. You don't really know me, but I understand your type." Brandon's voice dropped in tone. "Watch yourself," he warned. Nina raised her voice in response. "No, you watch yourself, because the person I contacted does know me. I saved his life once in Ghazni province. He is now with internal affairs in Raleigh, and if you think he won't answer my call, you are in for a surprise." She leaned just enough to unsettle him. "I have spent years observing men like you who act tough overseas. But true power didn't come from your weapons or badges. It came from the moments people chose to look away. When you crossed the line. Not today." The atmosphere in the room had grown heavier. Not louder, but more intense. Aaron had stopped pretending to wipe the counter. Two men seated in the back booth tilted their heads just slightly toward the unfolding scene. A teenage boy near the jukebox took out his earbuds. Ramsey muttered under his breath. And at that moment, the door buzzed again. This time, it was not Rain that entered, but a young man in a gray suit moving quickly. Phone still in hand, he walked directly to the counter and showed something on his screen to the manager. Then he turned, scanning the room. His gaze fixed on Nina Reynolds, then on the two officers. "You, Brandon Lee?" he said flatly. Lee tensed. "Who is asking?" The man revealed a badge. "Detective Owen Price, Wake County Internal Affairs. I need you outside now." Silence returned. A deep silence where even the sizzling from the kitchen griddle seemed to fade. Lee's eyes flickered between the badge and Nina, then back to the badge. "This is a joke." "Does it look like I'm laughing?" Price replied. Ramsey stepped back. "Wait, how did you get here so fast?" "I was already in town," Price answered. "Got a call from someone I trust. That call led me to two badge numbers I've been meaning to investigate again. So now we are doing that outside." Lee did not move. Price took a step closer, his tone sharper. That was not a suggestion. The two officers exchanged glances, and then quietly, without another word, walked past Nina and out the door. Price followed. The diner remained frozen in place. Nina finally let out a breath. She had not noticed that she had been holding her breath. Emily stepped back, her voice gentle. "Are you all right?" Nina looked up. "I am fine, just exhausted." Emily nodded. "Shall I warm that up for you?" Nina glanced at the mug. "Sure, why not?" She did not smile, yet something in her expression softened briefly. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the heaviness inside the diner seemed to ease. No one, however, anticipated what was about to unfold next. Outside, Brandon Lee paced back and forth as if he had just realized the ground beneath him was unstable. Cole Ramsey stood near the squad car, his arms crossed tightly, his mouth pressed into a firm line. Detective Price wasted no moments. "You know how this goes," he said quietly, but with authority. "You have been flagged before. Lee twice. Once last autumn for excessive force during a stop, and another for inappropriate conduct during a noise complaint." Lee snapped. "Those accusations were baseless." "Right," Price repeated. "Because your captain kept hiding the reports." Price then directed his attention to Ramsey. "You were present both times and supported him." Ramsey shifted uneasily. "I never touched anyone, no." "But you were aware and chose to remain silent," Price said. "That makes you complicit." Inside the diner, Nina observed them through the window, sipping her reheated coffee deliberately. She did not look angry, but appeared intensely focused, watching with the same sharp stillness she had relied on during long patrols in Kandahar. Outside, Price tapped his phone. "Captain Russo is on his way. You two are being placed on temporary suspension while we review all internal complaints from the last 3 years." "You have no case," Brandon muttered. "None of this will hold up." Price lifted a small voice recorder. "This entire morning was captured on tape from the moment I arrived and the call from Sergeant Reynolds. It's all archived. You really want to see how much won't hold once it spreads statewide?" Brandon said nothing. Inside, Emily finally voiced what everyone had been wondering. Was that really internal affairs, like the genuine kind? Nina nodded. "He used to be in my unit, Specialist Price back then. Tougher than he appears now." Emily leaned over the table. "I didn't know who you were. I just saw the jacket." "That's the point," Nina explained. "No one is supposed to know. You don't go around flaunting your service, you live with it. But sometimes you grow weary of being treated like garbage just because you don't have a permanent address." The teenager at the jukebox came over quietly. "Were they going to arrest you?" Nina looked at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "They were going to try." "Why?" he asked. She tapped her fingers on the mug. "Because sometimes people in power become lazy or worse. They get used to never being held accountable. Then they see someone like me and assume it's an easy target." The boy looked puzzled. "What kind of target?" She didn't answer immediately. "The kind that costs them nothing until it suddenly does." Outside, Captain Russo arrived, bald, stocky, and already frowning. Price greeted him briefly. Then he gestured toward the squad car. Russo spoke quietly to the 2 officers, his voice too soft to hear through the glass, but his tone carried a clear message. Brandon stepped back inside minutes later, brushing water off his suit jacket. "It's done for now," he said to Nina. "They're off duty until this gets resolved." Nina raised an eyebrow at the word resolved. "You know how this goes," Brandon said. "They will resist, But it is officially on record and initiated by your call. Everything is documented. Their careers just hit an impassable barrier." She looked down at her coffee, thinking it should have happened a long time ago. "I know," he replied, "but better late than never." Emily stayed quietly on the outskirts of the conversation. "So what happens to them?" she asked. "They face an internal review," Brandon explained. "There will be hearings, and maybe some early retirements to avoid public scandal. It all depends on what else we find when we dig into the older files." He turned to Nina once more. "I meant what I said on the phone. You saved my life. This is the least I could do." She studied him carefully before replying. "Then do one more thing for me." "Anything," he said. "Don't let this be brushed under the carpet." Brandon nodded, knowing this was about much more than just today. It was about uncovering a recurring issue. Detective Owen Price was not one to waste time. That very same afternoon, he drove back directly to the Raleigh office and requested access to archived complaints linked to Layton and Ramsey. There were not just a few. In fact, there were 12 reports. Some had been dismissed, while others were strangely closed without interviews. One complaint was technically still open, filed by a woman who alleged Brandon Lee pushed her during a noise complaint call after she asked to see his badge. The file had no follow-up, no photographs, no final report. Just a signature from Captain Russo marked as resolved. No further action was required. Price stared at the screen. Resolved did not mean justice. It meant ignored. By the next morning, he had everything printed and organized into folders. He called Nina Reynolds to update her. "They have a pattern," he said. "It is not just about bad behavior. They have been using their badges to push people around. Same conduct, same victims. Homeless, black, brown. Anyone they assumed no one would believe." Nina remained silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you have enough evidence for a hearing?" Price replied, "If they do not retire before that." She was quiet again, then said, "Good. That is a start." Later that week, Nina sat across from Price in a downtown cafe, this time inside, at a proper table, not a diner booth. Her duffel bag was still with her, but she wore a different coat, one with fewer holes. She sipped hot tea while Price laid several documents in front of her. "These go back to 2018, he said. "Same 2 officers, different stories, same tactics. There is even a report from a rookie who tried to raise concerns about Brandon Lee and was reassigned." Nina looked at the names. There were veterans, women from local shelters, even a street musician who used to play guitar outside the train station. Most left no contact information. Some were listed only by their first names. "I have been in a dozen towns since I got out," she remarked quietly. Nina explained that you often witness the same pattern repeatedly. Individuals like Brandon Lee behave as if their actions are official policy. They expect no resistance because most people lack the time or energy to file complaints. People are just trying to survive and meet their basic needs. Brandon leaned in and said, "You did more than just resist. You ended the silence." Nina shook her head calmly and replied, "I simply made a phone call. That one call set everything in motion." She traced her finger over one of the folders and asked, "Have you ever wondered why someone like Brandon signs up in the first place?" Control Price responded that some men do not wear the uniform to serve but rather to gain power. She agreed, and said once they get that power, they cling to it tightly. Price then looked at her and said, I meant what I said before. Do you want to testify when this story goes public? Nina hesitated and questioned what good it would do. She explained that drawing a clear line tells others they are not imagining things when something feels wrong. Nina exhaled deeply and then agreed to testify, but emphasized she was not doing it for herself. She did it for the woman too frightened to leave her name on the complaint, and for the veteran who was told he smelled too bad to sit on a bus bench. They shared a quiet moment, the kind that follows difficult truths. Price finally asked if she had a place to stay that night. She replied with shelter on Elm, mentioning they reserve a cot for her when she calls ahead. He nodded, but when he offered help, she interrupted gently, telling him not to treat this like charity. She said she was tired of people trying to fix her, and only wanted the truth to be known. Price smiled and assured her they would make sure it gets out there. She pushed the folders back toward him. "You take the pen, I'll handle the conversation," she said. Yet the truth was no longer going to remain hidden. By the next week, the story had reached the local news. It was not the headline segment, but aired just long enough to grab people's interest. 2 officers faced investigation. Internal Affairs had reopened previous complaints. Accusations of mistreating vulnerable civilians surfaced. The station displayed old portraits of Brandon Lee and Cole Ramsey, in their uniforms and smiling, the type of images that clashed with the dark stories behind them. News spread rapidly. The diner staff began receiving calls. The owner, Stan Riley, a former Marine himself, posted a shaky message on Facebook, stating the diner welcomed all guests and would cooperate fully with ongoing inquiries. Responses flooded in, some supportive while others critical. Emily, the waitress, rang a few days later. "I didn't know what to say back then," she admitted over the phone. "But I should have spoken up. I'm sorry." Nina sat on the back steps of the shelter, phone pressed against her ear. "You did more than most. At least you brought the coffee," she reassured. Emily chuckled nervously. "Still, it doesn't feel right." "That's exactly the point," Nina replied. "It's not meant to feel easy." The investigation uncovered more than anyone expected. Brandon Lee had quietly resolved a civil complaint in 2019. The department had labeled it as training intervention, which was code for covering it up. Now, everything was coming to light. Pressure increased as community groups demanded disciplinary measures. Reporters began arriving outside the police station. Brandon Lee and Cole Ramsey were placed on extended administrative leave. Rumors spread that Brandon had already reached out to a lawyer about arranging early retirement to avoid public hearings at the town meeting scheduled for the following Thursday. A woman stood up holding a wrinkled folder. Her name was Lorraine Pierce, and she shared with the crowd how Brandon had slammed her son against a police car when he talked back at 16. She had filed a complaint back then, but nothing came of it since they said it was her word against his. Lorraine explained, "Now I understand I was not the only one." Nina Reynolds did not attend that meeting. She felt it was unnecessary. Her influence had already ignited the spark. Instead, she spent the evening walking around a nearby church that served pop-up meals for the homeless. She assisted in handing out foil-wrapped sandwiches, and then sat beside a man named Curtis, who used to own an auto shop before losing his home last year. Curtis said as he slowly unwrapped his sandwich, "You really got those 2 removed from the force." Nina replied, "They removed themselves. I just exposed the truth." Curtis chuckled. "Well, it's about time someone did." At that moment, Nina was not seeking praise or recognition. She didn't want an award or a headline. What she truly desired was a safe place where people like Curtis could sit without feeling judged, and where women like Lorraine could speak without being ignored. She sought a form of justice free from conditions or limitations. The following morning, she received a call from Price. Both of them had filed their retirement forms. He mentioned it was effective immediately, with no pensions involved. Not after the kind of pressure they had brought down. Captain Russo had been transferred temporarily while under investigation. Nina remained silent for a long moment before saying, "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Price hesitated and replied, "It is not a victory, but it is progress, and that feels just." She responded, "Progress is something good." After a pause, he added, "There is talk about formal acknowledgement. The department might issue some kind of commendation." She said firmly, "They did not protect me, so they do not get to celebrate me." Then he asked, "What do you want?" She answered, "I want someone to listen to the next woman who claims mistreatment. I want someone to trust the next man who says he did nothing wrong." Back at the diner, Aaron placed a small sticker on the front window. It was subtle and unassuming, with white block letters reading, "Veterans welcome here, no questions asked." Even after the news headlines died down, her story continued to resonate. 2 months later, Fayetteville had settled. But the impact of the shift remained clear. A few new officers had joined the police force. A community liaison was appointed, and the town council passed a rule mandating all complaint files to remain accessible for public review for 5 years. Yet Nina Reynolds did not stay for the ceremonies or the publicity. She made her way to Greensboro, about 1 hour away, where she began volunteering. At a transitional housing facility for homeless veterans, Nina Reynolds rarely spoke about the diner. If someone recognized her, they kept silent, and if they mentioned it, she quickly shifted the conversation. She chose to invest her energy where it truly mattered. In the laundry room, distributing soap and quarters. In the kitchen, preparing soup from scratch. Outside on the grass, sharing quiet moments with men and women who had also endured too much, lost more than they could express, and bore invisible burdens. One afternoon while sweeping the back steps, she heard her name called. It was Aaron, who looked different now, more relaxed, hair tied back, wearing jeans and a worn t-shirt. He carried 2 paper bags in his hands. "I heard you were working here," he said. "I brought lunch. Hope you still like turkey and mustard." Nina smiled, surprised he drove all this way just for that. Aaron handed her a bag and said it was not only for that. They sat side by side on the curb with the warm spring breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Emily stayed quiet at first, then asked, "Have you ever thought about writing everything down? About that day?" "I do think about it," Nina replied. "But putting it down on paper feels too neat." It was far from neat. It was cruel, and it still is. Maybe that is exactly why people need to hear it. Aaron responded, "Because it is raw and honest." Nina gazed toward the road where volunteers were unloading canned goods from a van, and nearby an older man in a wheelchair chuckled at something. A little girl said, "You know what I realized after that day?" Nina said respect is not something that belongs to uniforms. It belongs to the person's character. You might wear a badge or carry a rifle or sit behind a judge's bench, but none of that truly matters if you treat others as if they are beneath you. Brandon nodded thoughtfully and said, "I think about that a lot too. You noticed something that day." Nina replied, "You felt that small unease inside your gut. That was your conscience speaking. That is what makes people change, not anger or fear, but that tiny voice telling you this is not right. Most people ignore that voice, but I did not ignore it this time, Emily added. Thanks to you. Nina did not answer immediately. She just kept chewing quietly. Later, as they prepared to leave, Emily hesitated and asked, "What will you do next?" Nina shrugged, saying she wanted to help here, to listen, and to ensure the next veteran who walks into a diner is not asked to leave. That may seem like small things, but they do not feel small to me, Emily said. Nina smiled once more. That is because you are paying attention now. Emily gave her a brief hug. Nothing dramatic, just genuine. As Emily pulled away, Nina said, "Hey, next time someone looks at a person like me and begins to judge, just ask yourself what it would cost you to show respect instead." This time, Brandon nodded right away. Got it. That night, Nina sat on her cot, with her small flip phone next to her. It had not rung for days, and that was okay. She was not waiting for anyone. At last, she was in a place where her silence was understood. She closed her eyes and exhaled. For once, no one was trying to push her out. Nobody demanded an explanation for her being there. She was just one of many like Nina Reynolds who tend to be overlooked until they have no choice but to stand up for themselves. Perhaps the moment has come to pay attention before it becomes too late. Subscribe if you think stories like this are important.